She hit the porch on her knees and didn't make a sound. No crying, no begging, just her hands flat against the cold wood. Her body shaking so hard the boards rattled, and a folded piece of paper pressed to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her heart inside her body. Wyatt Callahan threw the door open with his gun already drawn and stopped dead. She looked up at him, not at the gun, and with blood on her lip and 4 days of Montana wilderness on her skin, she said the last thing on earth he expected to hear. "My father said you needed a wife. If that line just stopped your heart the way it stopped his stay with me." Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels, because what happens next changed everything for both of them, and I don't want you to miss a single word. Wyatt Callahan had not fired his gun at a living thing in 3 years. He'd come close, twice with wolves on the north fence, once with a drifter who wandered too far up the mountain road and didn't understand what the look on Wyatt's face meant until Wyatt explained it without words. But he hadn't fired. He'd stopped needing to. The mountain had a way of sorting people, the ones who belonged there from the ones who didn't. And most people, when they felt what lived up here, turned around on their own. So when the sound came at dusk, that single soft thud on his front porch, Wyatt's hand went to the Colt before the sound had finished echoing. He was at the door in 4 steps, gun up, hammer back. He pulled it open, and there she was, on her knees. Both hands pressed flat to the boards, fingers white with cold and pressure. Her head was down, dark hair loose and tangled over her face. She was breathing in short, controlled bursts, the breathing of someone who had decided a long time ago that they were not going to fall apart, and was now having that decision tested at its absolute limit. Wyatt stood in the doorway, with his gun pointed at her. She raised her head slowly, and looked straight past the barrel of the Colt, like it wasn't there. Her eyes were dark brown, steady, and behind the exhaustion, behind the dried blood at the corner of her mouth and the 4 days of wilderness on her skin, there was something in those eyes that Wyatt had not seen in a very long time. "Someone still fighting. Who are you?" His voice came out rough. It always did. She opened her mouth. It took a moment. "My father said you needed a wife." The gun stayed up. Wyatt didn't move. He stood there in the doorway of the only home he'd allowed himself for 6 years, looking down at a woman he had never seen in his life, and heard those words hang in the cold mountain air between them like smoke. Then slowly he lowered the Colt. "Who's your father?" he said. She looked up at him, even on her knees, half dead on his porch. She didn't look away first. "Thomas Carter," she said. The gun dropped to his side. He got her inside. He didn't help her up, not because he didn't want to, but because something in the set of her jaw told him she hadn't asked for it. And offering something someone hasn't asked for was a quick way to make them feel like less than what they were. So he stepped back from the doorway and held the lamp up so she could see, and he watched her use the porch post to drag herself upright. She collected her suitcase from the boards, a battered thing. One latch broken open, tucked it under her arm, and walked through his door on her own 2 feet. She sat at his table. He fed the stove, didn't speak while he did it. The fire caught slowly, the way it always. The cabin had been cold for a long time and had gotten used to it. "Thomas is dead," he said, still not looking at her. 6 weeks ago. Her voice was even, the controlled kind of even that cost something. "His heart," the doctor said. "What doctor?" "The one Whitmore sent." Wyatt turned around. "Say that name again," he said. She looked at him without flinching. "Graham Whitmore. He owns the valley south of the Judith River Basin. He owned my father's debt. He owned the doctor who signed the papers." She paused. "He thought he owned me. Thought." I left before he could finish the argument. Wyatt pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He looked at this woman, 23 years old, maybe 24, with blood on her lip and mud on her boots, and a suitcase she held onto like a lifeline, and he did what he was good at. He looked, and he thought, and he didn't say anything until he was ready. "How long have you been running?" he said. 11 days. "On foot?" "Had a horse until day 4. Whitmore's men caught up with me outside of Lewistown. I left the horse and went into the tree line on foot. They don't track well in the dark." Something almost cold passed through her eyes. "I do." Wyatt studied her. "You said your father told you to come here," he said. "To me specifically." "Yes, we've never met, I know that. I haven't been to the valley in 6 years. Your father and I met exactly once. I was 22 years old and too stupid to know when ice wasn't safe to cross." He stopped. "He told you about that?" "He told me everything about that," she said. "He told me a lot of things in the last weeks of his life. The nights got long toward the end and he couldn't sleep and he'd talk." She looked at her hands on the table. "He talked about the Bitterroot crossing the most. He said you went under twice. He said the current should have taken you. He said he wasn't even sure why he'd tied the rope to the tree before you fell. Like something told him to before it happened." The fire shifted. The cabin creaked with the wind off the ridge. Wyatt had not thought about that crossing in years. He had put it away, in the same place he put everything that mattered too much, sealed off. Out of reach. Because reaching for things that mattered was how a man got hurt. He had gone under twice. The second time he'd been sure he wasn't coming back up. And then the rope. 2 hands hauling with everything they had. He'd never found out who had him until it was over. And by then he was on the bank, coughing up river water, and Thomas Carter was already asking him if he was all right. Quiet and matter-of-fact, like the whole thing was ordinary. He never said a word about it, Wyatt said, more to himself than her. That was him, Amelia said. He didn't believe in keeping score. He just believed in doing what was right and moving on. Silence. "What was the debt?" Wyatt said. She told him. Whitmore had produced documents a year before Thomas died, a loan claim for $1,200. Dated 3 years prior. Thomas had never borrowed a cent from the man. He'd gone to the county office. He'd hired a lawyer with money he didn't have. He'd written letters to anyone who might listen. None of it made a difference. Because in the valley south of the Judith, Graham Whitmore was the law, the lender, and the judge, and there was no court he couldn't reach. When Papa died, Amelia said Whitmore came to the house himself. First time I'd ever seen him in person. She stopped for a moment. He was very calm, very polite. He sat at our kitchen table and drank our coffee and told me that the debt transferred to me as the surviving heir, and that there were 2 ways to settle it. She looked at Wyatt directly. Money or marriage? His marriage. His. Yes. And for the first time, something that was not quite a smile crossed her face. It was harder than a smile, more like the expression of someone who had already decided exactly what they were and wasn't interested in negotiation. "I said I would need a few days to think about it," she said. I left that night. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "Smart said necessary," she said. He stood up, went to the stove and ladled out what was their venison stew. 2 days old, solid and hot. He set the bowl in front of her without asking. She looked at it for exactly 1 second, then ate. Not fast, not slow. The way someone eats when they've been pretending for a long time that they weren't hungry, and have finally run out of reasons to pretend. He let her finish before he said anything else. When the bowl was empty, she set the spoon down carefully and looked at him. "You're going to offer me a horse," she said. "I was thinking about it. My father said you would. Your father knew me well for a man who met me once. He was good at reading people." She folded her hands on the table. Not pleading. "Mr. Callahan, I walked 4 days through those mountains in November. I have $4, a change of clothes, and my mother's Bible. I am not here because I think marrying a stranger is an ideal situation. I am here because I have run out of places to run. And my father trusted you with the one thing he had left." She looked at him straight. "Me." The word sat in the room. Wyatt looked at this woman. The blood on her lip, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she kept her hands flat on the table so he wouldn't see them shake. "Why didn't he send you to the sheriff?" he said. "Whitmore owns the sheriff. A lawyer? Whitmore ruined the last lawyer who moved against him. He left the territory with his family in the middle of the night, and no one's heard from him since. A neighbor. A family friend? Every family in the valley is either afraid of Whitmore or in his pocket," she said. Papa knew that. That's why he spent the last weeks of his life thinking about who was left. She paused. He came up with one name. Wyatt was quiet for a long time. Outside, the mountain wind pressed against the cabin walls. The fire burned steady now. He looked at the woman across his table and he thought about Thomas Carter, a man who had saved a stranger's life without being asked and without expecting anything back, and who had apparently spent the years after that quietly deciding that stranger was worth trusting. "There's a room off the back," he said finally, standing. "Used to be a hand's room. Cot and a blanket. You'll sleep there tonight." She looked up at him. "And tomorrow?" she said. "Tomorrow we talk." He moved toward the hallway, then stopped. "The latch on the room, I'll leave it open. No lock. You want to leave in the night, nothing stopping you." He looked back at her. "I want you to know that." Something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, but a small careful unlocking of something that had been braced for a very long time. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "I haven't decided anything." He paused at the door. "Amelia." She looked up the first time he'd used her name. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. "He was the best kind of man. I only met him once and I knew it." She held his gaze for a moment. Her jaw tightened once. Then she nodded the tight, controlled nod of someone who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and cannot afford to put it down yet. He left her to it. He didn't sleep. He sat in the dark by the dying stove with his boots off and the Colt on the table beside him, and he thought. That was the thing people didn't understand about grief. It didn't go away with time. It got quieter, maybe. It learned to be still when you told it to. But put something in front of a man that reminded him of what he'd lost. And all that stillness came apart. His wife's name had been Clara. She had brown hair and a laugh that didn't care who heard it, and she'd had opinions about everything horses. Weather, the proper way to mend a fence, and she'd been right about most of them. Which had driven him half crazy, and he'd loved her absolutely for it. His son had been called James. He'd lived 22 months. The fever came in August. It took James in 4 days. Clara in 7, and when the 7th day came and it was over, Wyatt Callahan had buried them both on the hill, behind the house they'd built together. And he had saddled his horse and ridden north and not stopped until there was nothing around him but mountain and silence, and the kind of cold that kept everything else away. He had built this ranch with his hands alone over 2 years. He had hired hands who worked and left and didn't ask questions. He had arranged his life so that nothing could reach him. He had been good at it. He sat in the dark and listened to the silence of the cabin and noticed, for the first time in years, that the silence had a quality to it tonight that was different than usual. It wasn't empty. Someone was breathing in the back room. Someone was alive in this house. He sat with that for a very long time. She was up before him. He came out at first light expecting to find the back room empty. The cot neat, the woman gone. He'd half convinced himself in the night that this was the most likely outcome, that she'd rest a few hours, think clearer, and decide that a stranger on a mountain was a worse bet than whatever she could figure out on her own. Instead, he found her at his table. His record books were open in front of her. 3 of them, spread out side by side, the pages marked with small folded corners. She had a pencil in her hand, and she was moving down a column of figures with the focused patience of someone who had done 10,000 times and trusted what the numbers said. Wyatt stopped in the doorway. "Those are mine," he said. "Yes." She didn't look up. "Did you know that you've been overpaying your grain supplier in Billings by roughly 40 cents per pound?" For at least 3 years, he didn't move. 3 years, he repeated. "At minimum. Now she looked up. Her eyes were clearer this morning. Rest had done something for her, even a few hours of it. Your records before that are incomplete, so I can't go further back without guessing. But Mr. Callahan, she turned the book toward him and pointed to a column. Someone has been adjusting these figures after the fact. The ink color changes, slightly, but it changes. You'd have to be looking for it to see it. Wyatt walked to the table. He looked at the column she was pointing to. He looked at it for a long time. Curtis does the accounting, he said slowly. Curtis had been with the ranch 3 years. 3 years of steady, quiet work, never any trouble. Always had the numbers ready when Wyatt asked. 3 years. Curtis has been stealing from you, Amelia said, not cruel about it. Precise, at minimum $600, maybe more. He's been adjusting the supplier invoices and keeping the difference. It's not complicated, it's just patient. She looked at him. How long has he been with you? 3 years, Wyatt said. She nodded once, like she'd expected that. Show me all of it, he said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She showed him. She walked him through it column by column, figure by figure, turning the books so he could read them clearly, pointing to the exact places where the numbers shifted. She didn't talk down to him. She didn't explain slowly like he was slow. She laid it out the way a person lays something out for someone they expect to understand it. And she waited for him to catch up when he needed to. And she didn't make him feel the weight. By mid-morning, Wyatt understood exactly what had been done to him. And how, and for how long. He leaned back in his chair. How do you know how to read this? He said. My father taught me. She closed the nearest book carefully. After my mother died, it was just the two of us running the ranch. Papa said a woman in this territory who couldn't read her own accounts was a woman waiting to be robbed. A small pause. He was right, he was robbed anyway, Wyatt said. Yes, but he saw it happen. He knew exactly who did it and how. She looked at him. That matters more than people think. Wyatt studied her across the table. This woman who had arrived half dead on his porch less than 12 hours ago, and who had, in the space of a morning, found something it would have taken him years to find on his own. Maybe never. He thought about what it said about a man that he could be robbed for 3 years in his own house and never see it. He let himself think it, because a man who couldn't face an honest thought about himself wasn't much use to anyone. Your father trusted me, he said. He thought I was worth trusting. He did. He might have been wrong about that. Amelia looked at him for a moment. Then she said he wasn't wrong about people. Not once in my life that I can remember. The cabin was quiet. I'll speak to Curtis this morning, Wyatt said. He did it alone. In the barn, with the doors open and the cold light coming in flat and gray. He didn't bring the colt. He didn't raise his voice. He laid the figures on the workbench between them, and he let Curtis look at them. And he watched the man's face go through all the stages: confusion, calculation, and finally, the particular stillness of someone who has realized the game is finished. I've got 2 offers for you, Wyatt said. You ride out before breakfast. You don't come back, we're done. Or I send to the sheriff at Lewistown, and we let that play out the way it plays out. He looked at Curtis. Up to you which one. Curtis rode out before the coffee was ready. Pete Murdoch and his brother Eli watched from the fence line. They were good hands, young, strong, not complicated, and they understood that what had just happened was not their business to ask about. But they watched Wyatt walk back toward the cabin afterward. And they watched the dark-haired woman standing by the fence post. And they looked at each other with the wordless communication of brothers. Something on this mountain had shifted overnight. They were both right that it had. The days settled into something neither of them had named yet. Amelia worked. That was the first thing Wyatt noticed, not that she helped. Because help implied excess, something optional. She worked. She was up with the light. She pulled her weight without being asked. And she did it without making any show of it. She managed the accounts in the evenings with the same precision she'd shown that first morning. She adjusted, recalculated, found 3 additional places where Curtis had been shaving margins in ways that were subtle enough that anyone not looking for them would walk right past. In the morning she was outside. He'd assumed she'd stay in. Most people in a new situation stayed close to what was familiar. But Amelia didn't seem to have that instinct, or if she did, she'd overridden it a long time ago. She learned the animal routines in a week and a half. Watching first, doing second, not mixing up the order. She found his bay mare favoring her left front leg on the 3rd morning and crouched down in the mud of the paddock to examine it before Pete had even noticed the mare was off. "Stone bruise," she told Wyatt when he came over. "It's not deep. She needs the foot packed and 2 days off the work rotation." Wyatt crouched beside her. He looked at the hoof. He looked at her hands, the way she was holding the leg firm but not tight. Confident without forcing. "You've done this before," he said. "Papa's ranch ran 6 horses at most. You get to know all of them." He stood up. "You're right about the bruise." "I know," she said. And she stood up too, calm as anything, and went back to what she was doing. He caught himself watching her with the horses more than once after that. The evenings were the complicated part. 2 people in one small cabin. 1 table, 1 stove. It was practical to eat together. It was practical to talk. But practical had a way of becoming something else when the nights were long and the mountain was quiet, and both people at the table were carrying things they'd been carrying for too long. It started with the work, the accounts, the ranch plans. What needed doing before winter deepened? Safe ground. Concrete things with answers. Then one night she asked him about the mountains. "Why here?" she said. He'd been quiet for a long time. Long enough that she'd started to shift the conversation. "Reach for something easier. Had a family," he said. She went still. He said it to the table. "Not to her. And to James," he stopped. The names still had weight. After all this time they still had weight, and he'd stopped being surprised by that. Fever took them August of '79. 4 days for James. 7 for Clara. He was quiet. After that I needed somewhere that wasn't anywhere I'd been with them. The fire burned. The wind moved against the cabin walls. "So you came up," Amelia said softly. "I came up," he said. "Kept busy." He looked up then. Finally, met her eyes, busy enough. She didn't say she was sorry. He was grateful for that. He'd heard sorry so many times in the year after it happened that the word had stopped meaning anything. Instead, she just looked at him with those steady dark eyes. And what was in them wasn't pity. It was recognition. "My mother died when I was 15, she said. Pneumonia. Fast, the way it takes people fast when they decide to go." She looked at her hands. "Papa never really recovered. He kept going, he worked. He smiled. He made sure I had everything I needed. But there was a room in him that stayed closed after that. You could feel the door was there even when he didn't show it." She looked up. "I think you know what I mean." "Yeah," Wyatt said. Quiet. "I know exactly what you mean." They sat with that for a moment. 2 people on opposite sides of a table, with the same locked room somewhere inside them, recognizing the door in each other without needing to say so. "She would have liked the mountains," Wyatt said finally. He didn't know where it came from. Clara, she liked big things. Big skies, big weather. Said she felt like herself when she couldn't see walls in any direction. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that it showed at the corners. She would have picked a fight with the wind every morning and been happy about it. Amelia looked at him. "She sounds remarkable," she said. "She was," he said. She really was. The fire settled. The night pressed in around the cabin and neither of them said anything for a while. And it was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had both learned that quiet be safe. And were surprised to find it safe in the same place at the same time. It was 3 weeks in when Wyatt came back from the North Ridge and found her at the table with her father's ledger open and her hands pressed flat on either side of it. He knew what that meant before she said anything. "Tell me," he said. "I saw riders from the kitchen window." Her voice was steady. It was always steady. South Road, 2 of them, sitting their horses just at the tree line, looking up toward the ranch. How long were they there? 20 minutes. Then they turned back. Wyatt sat down across from her. "They're scouting," he said. "Reporting back. Whitmore will know by tonight, and tomorrow he'll send more than 2. Silence. She looked at him across the table, this woman who had held herself together through 11 days of running. Through her father's death, through a stranger's cabin, and the slow, uncertain process of learning to exist in it. She looked at him and she didn't fall apart. But something in her eyes said clearly that she had been waiting for this, bracing for it, and that the waiting had cost her. "I need you to tell me everything," Wyatt said. "Everything your father knew. Everything you've seen, everything you suspect about Whitmore. All of it right now. We don't have the luxury of slow anymore." She pulled the ledger toward her and opened it. "Then listen carefully," she said. She told him everything. The debt documents, she described them in precise detail. The paperweight, the seal, the signature she'd memorized, because she'd stared at it trying to find the flaw for weeks. Whitmore's men names, faces, which ones did the talking and which ones did the other kind of work. The families she knew had been pushed out, the Hargroves from the South Fork. Gone 18 months ago. The Delacroix widow, 70 years old. Gone in a single day last spring, her land absorbed so smoothly that people were still arguing about whether it had been legal. Old man Sutherland up near the Musselshell, who had simply disappeared one February, and whose land was recorded as sold the following month. Sold to who, Wyatt said. Whitmore's brother-in-law. A holding company with a Denver address. She turned a page in the ledger. Papa tracked it. He tracked all of it. He wrote down every name, every date, every conversation he had with Whitmore's men, and exactly what they said. She looked up. He was building a record. He didn't know if it would ever matter. He just couldn't stand to let it go unwritten. Wyatt was quiet. "There's more," she said. "Tell me." "The contracts Whitmore uses, the debt documents. Papa believed they were being produced in advance. Blank forms, pre-signed by a judge in Helena who is on Whitmore's payroll. Fill in the name, fill in the amount, file them through a clerk who doesn't ask questions." She looked at him steadily. "If that's true, if we could prove that it isn't just Papa's case. It's every family he's done this to, every debt that was never real." Wyatt sat back. He looked at the ledger. He thought about the Hargroves and the Delacroix widow and old man Sutherland. He thought about a man who kept careful records of an injustice he didn't know how to stop, because he couldn't stand to let it go unwritten. He thought about Thomas Carter on a frozen riverbank with a rope, doing what was right because it was right, and never mentioning it again. "How many families," he said, "that I can confirm?" 7, that Papa suspectin'. 15 families, at minimum. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands on the table, looked at the ledger between them, looked at the woman across from him who had carried this the whole time through the running. Through the mountains, through the quiet weeks of building trust in a stranger's cabin, and had not told him everything at once, because she was smart enough to know a man had to come to things at his own pace. Her father's daughter all the way through. "Amelia," he said. "Yes, I made you an offer 3 weeks ago, a practical one." He paused. "I think it's time to make a different kind." She looked at him and waited. "If we're going to do this, the whole thing, the way your father was asking, you need to understand what I'm offering and what I'm not. I'll give you my name. I'll stand beside you in whatever comes. I'll fight this because it's right, and because I owe your father more than I ever had the chance to repay." He stopped. "But I won't pretend to be something I'm not. The man I was before, the one who knew how to live open, how to let people in. He's been gone a long time. I don't know how much of him is still here." Amelia was quiet. She looked at him across the ledger, across the lamplight. across everything that had built up between them in 3 weeks of meals and silences and careful morning conversations about horses and numbers, and what a dead man's notebook meant for 15 families in a valley neither of them lived in anymore. Wyatt, she said, not his title, just his name. The way she'd started saying it in the last week, without either of them marking when it changed. I didn't come up this mountain looking for the man you were. I came looking for the man you are. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to stand with me. Those are two very different things. Outside, the mountain was dark and vast and cold. 2 riders had gone back down into the valley carrying news. And somewhere at the bottom of all that dark, Graham Whitmore was about to learn that the woman he'd been hunting had stopped running. She had found somewhere to stand. And the man standing beside her had just remembered what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. The wedding took place on a Thursday morning with 2 witnesses and no flowers. Pete Murdoch stood by the door with his hat in his hands, turning it around and around the brim the way men do when they don't know what to do with themselves. His brother Eli stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the whole thing with the careful attention of someone memorizing something important. The traveling preacher, who came through the mountain towns twice a year, had been at the Callahan Ranch by pure chance passing through on his circuit, stopping for a meal and a night's rest, and when Wyatt told him what he needed. The man had looked at them both for a long moment and said that God worked in stranger ways than this, and he was not in the habit of arguing with the timing. Amelia wore the blue dress from the suitcase, the one that had been spilling out through the broken latch on the night she arrived. It was the best thing she owned, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so. She had her hair pinned back. She held her mother's Bible in both hands. Not because the preacher asked her to, but because she needed something to hold on to, and it was the thing she'd chosen. Wyatt wore clean clothes and his good boots, and the expression of a man who has made a decision and is committed to it regardless of how strange it feels, standing on the inside of it. The preacher read the words, the right words, the traditional ones. The ones people had been saying over each other for centuries because some things mattered enough to be said out loud. When he got to the part about the ring, Wyatt reached into his breast pocket and produced a plain band of silver. Nothing elaborate. He'd ridden down to Lewistown 2 days earlier. Alone, early enough in the morning that he was back before noon. And he hadn't told her he was going, and he hadn't told her why. She looked at the ring when he held it out. Then she looked at him. He didn't explain, he just held it and waited. She gave him her hand. He put the ring on her finger and it fit, which surprised them both slightly. And the preacher pronounced them married in the eyes of God and the territory of Montana. And Pete said congratulations too loudly for the size of the room. And Eli elbowed him. Afterward, when the preacher had gone and the Murdoch brothers had gone back to work with the elaborate casualness of men pretending they hadn't just witnessed something significant, Wyatt and Amelia stood in the kitchen alone. She was looking at the ring on her hand. He was watching her look at it. I should have asked you first, he said. About the ring. It fits, she said. That's not what I... She looked up. It fits. That's enough. He studied her face for a moment, trying to read what was behind the stillness. He was getting better at that, reading what she kept still, not just what she showed. You all right, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Just a moment. Then she said, my father would have liked this. Not the circumstances, but this. She looked at the ring again. He would have liked you. He already did, Wyatt said. That's how we got here. Something crossed her face then, something that was close to a laugh and close to a cry and settled somewhere in between. She pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling for a second the way people do when they're deciding not to let something happen. Then she looked at him straight and said, all right. What needs doing today? And that, Wyatt thought, was that. They were married. They had work to do. And Graham Whitmore was still at the bottom of the mountain. The real trouble, as it turned out, started on a Tuesday. It was Eli who brought word, riding in hard from the south track. His horse lathered and his face tight in the way it got when he was working to stay calm about something that was not calm. He found Wyatt at the north fence line and didn't bother with a preamble. 3 men on the south road, Eli said. Not scouts this time. They've got papers. Legal-looking papers. And they're asking in town whether there's a woman at the Callahan Ranch and whether the marriage is registered. Wyatt pulled his gloves off slowly. One finger at a time. Where are Lewistown? Far as I know. Staying onto the ranch. Not yet. They will, Wyatt said. He looked down the mountain toward the valley, the kind of look that went past the trees, past the road, past the visible distance, all the way to where it was aimed. Whitmore's testing first. He always tests first, finds out whether a man will fold before he bothers coming himself. He pulled his gloves back on. Go back to work. Don't talk about this where you can be heard. Eli nodded and rode back. Wyatt stood at the fence line alone for another minute. Then he went to find Amelia. She was in the small storage room off the kitchen that she'd converted. In the past 3 weeks, into something resembling an office, a place where the accounts lived. Where Thomas Carter's ledger lived, where she spent the evenings building the kind of clear and documented picture of Whitmore's operations that a court might someday be asked to look at. He'd watched this project grow from a single notebook to an organized system that now covered most of the table's surface. And he'd understood, without being told, that this was what she needed to do. This was how she fought. He knocked on the doorframe. She looked up. Read his face. They're in Lewistown, he said. She set her pencil down. How many? 3. What kind of papers? Don't know yet. Could be the debt claim against you. Could be something else he's constructed. He leaned against the doorframe. He's going to try the legal road first. It's cleaner. Less visible. If he can make a court say you owe the debt, and that you left before it was settled, he has grounds to come up here with authority behind him. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Not the frozen quiet of fear, the working quiet of someone moving pieces around a board. We registered the marriage in Lewistown, she said. That's on record. Under territorial law, a married woman's pre-existing debt transfers to the husband. Whitmore knew that it's why he didn't want to wait. Why he came to the house himself the night after Papa died. He wanted to close it before I had the chance to. She stopped. He didn't think I'd run. He thought I'd be too frightened. He underestimated you, Wyatt said. Most people do, she said, without any particular pride in it. Just fact. The debt is a problem either way, Wyatt said. Even if the original claim is fraudulent, we need to prove it. And proving it means producing evidence that will hold up in front of a judge who isn't in Whitmore's pocket. I know. She looked at the ledger on the table. Papa's records go a long way, but they're one man's account of what was said to him. That's not nothing, but it's not enough. She looked up. We need someone else. Someone who can speak to the same pattern from their own experience. She paused. The Hargroves. I don't know where they went. I do, Amelia said. Papa knew too. They went north up toward Havre. He exchanged letters with them twice before he died. They kept their own records. Wyatt Robert Hargrove was a careful man. Same as Papa. She looked at him steadily. If we can reach them. If they're willing to come forward. Wyatt looked at her. That's a big if, he said. Everything about this is a big if, she said. But sitting here waiting for Whitmore's men to work up the nerve to ride up this mountain is also a choice. It's just a worse one. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, write the letter. I'll get it sent. She was already reaching for the paper. The letter went out the next morning with the supply rider who went to Lewistown twice weekly. And the 3 men in the hotel continued to sit in Lewistown, asking careful questions, and Wyatt continued to watch the south road. And the mountain held its breath. It was during this waiting this stretched, taut, watchful period that lasted 10 days and felt like 30 that the thing Wyatt had not planned for began happening. He started looking forward to the evenings. He noticed it with the particular discomfort of a man who prides himself on noticing things in other people, but has gotten out of the habit of noticing things in himself. It was small at first. He'd be at the fence line or the barn or out on the North Ridge, and somewhere around mid-afternoon he'd become aware of a low-level impatience that had nothing to do with work or weather or the three men in Lewistown. It was the kind of impatience that had a direction to it. The kind that was pointed at something specific. It was pointed at supper time. At the table. At the person across it, he did not examine this closely. He was not by nature a man who examined his own interior with any enthusiasm. But he was honest enough, when he caught himself at it, to call it what it was. He liked talking to her, more than that. He thought better when she was in the room. She had a way of asking questions that weren't really questions. She'd say something that sounded like idle observation, and it turned out to be the exact corner of a problem he'd been walking around without being able to see straight at. She did it without making it obvious she was doing it. He'd only caught onto the pattern in the second week, and when he did, he'd felt something between irritation and admiration. And the admiration had won. He came in from the barn one evening near the end of the 10 days and found her standing in the middle of the kitchen with a letter in her hand and an expression he hadn't seen on her before. It was the expression of someone who has been braced for a blow for so long that when good news comes, the body doesn't know what to do with it. Robert Hargrove wrote back, she said. Wyatt stopped and he kept everything. Her voice was not quite steady. Wyatt, he kept everything, the debt notices, the dates, the names of the men Whitmore sent, copies of the contracts. He has a ledger nearly identical to Papa's. She looked up from the letter. And he says there are 2 other families. The Sutherland widow, she's in Havre too. And a man named Marcus Driscoll, who had a small cattle operation south of the Musselshell. Driscoll went all the way to Helena to file a complaint 18 months ago. She paused. The complaint was dismissed, but Driscoll kept a copy of everything he filed. 4 families, Wyatt said. 4 families with documented evidence, all the same pattern. All the same fraudulent debt structure. She set the letter down on the table. Her hands were shaking slightly, the first time he'd seen that happen when she wasn't exhausted. Wyatt, this isn't one man's word against Whitmore's. This is a pattern, documented, by multiple families who have no connection to each other except that Whitmore targeted them all. He crossed to the table, looked at the letter. He stood close enough to read it over her shoulder, and for a moment neither of them moved. Standing there in the kitchen with the letter between them and the weight of what it meant, settling around them like something physical. This can win, Amelia said quietly, if we can get it in front of the right judge. If we can get all 4 families to testify. She turned and looked at him. Close, because of the small space, because she'd turned before she'd thought about the distance. This can actually win. He looked at her. He was close enough to see the line where exhaustion had lived in her face for weeks and where, right now, underneath it, something else had surfaced. Something that was brightness, pure and simple. The brightness of someone who had been fighting in the dark and had just seen the first genuine shape of a way through. He took a step back, not because he wanted to. Then we need to get to work, he said. His voice came out a shade rougher than intended. She looked at him for one more second. Then she nodded and turned back to the table and pulled her paper toward her. They worked until past midnight that night. The response came from Lewistown 2 days later. But it did not come in a letter. It came in the form of Graham Whitmore's lawyer, a man named Aldous Crane. Slim and gray and impeccably dressed for a man who had ridden 2 hours up a mountain, arriving at the Callahan gate with one of the hotel men behind him and a sealed document in his coat pocket. Wyatt met him at the gate. Crane was polite. He had the polished politeness of men who use good manners the way other men used weapons as a way of establishing distance, of making the other person feel slightly smaller and less certain without being able to say exactly how it happened. He introduced himself. He expressed, with what appeared to be genuine warmth, his congratulations on Wyatt's recent marriage. Then he produced the document. My client, Mr. Graham Whitmore, wishes to resolve the outstanding debt matter amicably, Crane said. This is a formal notice of claim against the estate of Thomas Carter, transferred to the surviving heir, Mrs. Amelia Carter, or, as she is now known, Mrs. Callahan. The debt is recorded as $1,400. He smiled pleasantly. My client is willing to accept $1,200 in full settlement and considers the matter closed. Wyatt held the document without looking at it. Your client is welcome to his willingness, he said. The debt isn't real. Crane's smile did not change. Mr. Callahan, I understand this may be a difficult situation. However, the documentation is quite clear and has been reviewed by a judge in Helena, Wyatt said. I know. A judge in Helena who has reviewed a number of Mr. Whitmore's documents over the past several years. We've noticed a pattern there too. The smile stayed on Crane's face, but something behind it changed. I would encourage you to consider the offer carefully, Crane said. My client has been patient. That patience is not unlimited. Tell your client, Wyatt said, that he picked the wrong family this time. He handed the document back. Crane looked at the document in his own hand for a moment. Then he folded it carefully, put it back in his pocket, and tipped his hat with a small, precise motion. Good day, Mr. Callahan, he said. He rode back down the mountain. Wyatt stood at the gate until he was out of sight. Then he turned and went back inside. Amelia was standing in the kitchen doorway. I heard, she said. Good, he said. Then I don't have to repeat it. 1,400, she said. He added 200 to the original claim. For inconvenience. Probably. Wyatt, her voice was steady, but her eyes were something else. This means he's committed to it. He wouldn't have sent Crane up here with paperwork if he had any intention of backing off. It means he'll escalate. I know that too. She looked at him. Are you afraid? The question landed plainly, no softness around it. And he liked her for asking it that way, not dancing around it. Not pretending the answer was obvious. Treating him like a man who was allowed to have a real answer. No, he said, and then more honest nod of him. She waited. I'm afraid of what happens to you if this goes wrong, he said. I'm afraid of what it costs you if I make the wrong move. That's different from being afraid of Whitmore. She looked at him for a long moment. Then don't make the wrong move, she said. Not light about it. Not dismissive. He almost smiled. I'll do my best, that'll be enough, she said. And she said it like she meant it, which was the strangest and most sustaining thing she could have said. They started reaching out to the other families the next morning. It was Amelia who wrote the letters, all 4 of them. To the Hargroves and the Sutherland widow and Marcus Driscoll and one other family she'd found through Hargrove's letter, the Bellamy family, who had left the valley 3 years ago under circumstances that Robert Hargrove described as fast and frightening. She wrote each letter carefully, specifically, telling them what she knew and what she had and what she was asking. She told them the truth, that this was not a certain thing. That there was risk in coming forward, that Whitmore was powerful, and the legal road was not guaranteed to go their way. Then she asked anyway. People don't usually respond well to that kind of honesty, Pete said one evening, when he'd been helping carry boxes of documents from the storage room and had stopped to look at the letter she was finishing. People respond better to honesty than to being managed, Amelia said without looking up. If they agree to come forward and it costs them, I want it to be because they made an informed decision. Not because I made it sound safer than it is. Pete thought about that. My father used to say something like that. Your father sounds like he was smart. He was. He was also usually right, which was harder to live with. He set the box down. Mrs. Callahan, she looked up. He was holding his hat. In the particular position men held hats when they wanted to say something they weren't sure they had the right to say. Wyatt hasn't been, this ranch hasn't had. He stopped. Started again. It's been different up here, since you came. That's all I wanted to say. Amelia looked at him for a moment. Better different, she said. Yes, ma'am. Pete said. A lot better. She looked back at her letter. Thank you. Pete. He left. She kept writing. But there was something in her face after that, a softening, small and guarded, but real, that stayed there for the rest of the evening. The first response came from Marcus Driscoll 9 days later. He was coming. He had his records, all of them, including the copy of the Helena complaint. He had 2 neighbors who had witnessed the delivery of Whitmore's debt notice to his property and who were willing to put their names on affidavits. He was angry in the way that men get angry when they've been carrying something unjust for a long time and have just been offered a reason to believe it might matter. He asked only one thing in his letter: was there a lawyer involved? Because the one time he'd tried the legal road alone, it had cost him his filing fee and nothing else. Wyatt wrote back himself. He'd been thinking about the lawyer problem for 2 weeks. The last lawyer who'd moved against Whitmore had left the territory in the night. That was known. It was also known that the legal community in this part of Montana had learned to read that story clearly, and that most of the attorneys within a day's ride of the valley were not interested in being the next chapter of it. But there was a man in Helena, a man named Edgar Frost, who had been a territorial prosecutor for 12 years before moving to private practice and who had, by reputation, the particular combination of legal brilliance and personal stubbornness that made him willing to take cases other men wouldn't. Wyatt had heard his name through a circuit court judge he'd done business with 3 years prior. He'd filed it away without knowing why. He knew why now. Helena is 2 days by train from Lewistown, Amelia said. When he told her, someone would have to go and make the case in person. A letter isn't enough for this. I know, Wyatt said. You can't go, she said, if you leave the ranch now. Whitmore's men will be up that road the next morning. I know that too. She looked at him. I'll go, she said. The silence that followed was the particular kind that forms when 2 people both know what one of them just said is right, and one of them doesn't want it to be. Amelia, I know Whitmore's operation better than anyone alive, she said. I have Papa's ledger. I can explain the pattern clearly because I lived through it. And I'm the surviving heir to the original debt claim. I'm the legal target. If anyone can make Edgar Frost understand why this case is worth taking, it's me. She looked at him straight. You know I'm right. He did know. That was the problem. You'd be off the mountain, he said. Away from the ranch, exposed. I'd be on a train headed away from the valley. Not toward it. Whitmore's men are watching the roads here. Not the Helena train line. She paused, and I'd be taking the ledger. If something happened to me, which it won't, it still gets to Frost. The evidence still exists. He looked at her for a long time. The fire in the kitchen stove ticked and settled. Outside the wind was picking up, the way it did in the afternoons before the temperature dropped. You planned this already, he said, not accusing. Realizing. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks, she said. Since Crane came up the mountain. Since before that, she said. Since the night Hargrove's letter arrived. I just needed to know if the evidence was strong enough before I said it out loud. He looked at the table. At his hands. At the thin silver band on her finger visible at the edge of his sight. He'd put that ring on her hand to protect her. That had been the reason. The protection of a name, a legitimate marriage, a man between her and Whitmore's reach. And now she was telling him the best way to protect everything they'd built was for her to get on a train alone. Take Pete, he said finally. He rides to Lewistown with you. He stays with you until you're on the train. He meets you at the other end. That leaves Eli alone here. Eli's worth 2 men when it matters, Wyatt said. And I'll be here. She looked at him. He looked at her. All right, she said. Then unexpectedly, he said, be careful. And the way it came out had nothing general about it. It was not the polite careful that people said to each other as habit. It was specific. It was personal. It was the careful of a man who has started to understand that the world is significantly worse as a concept without a particular person in it. Amelia heard the difference. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he had never seen on her before, something open and unguarded, and quickly put away. Like a door opened and shut too fast to see inside. "I will be," she said. She left on a Wednesday. She took the ledger in her suitcase, the same battered suitcase. The same broken latch, now tied shut with a leather cord. She wore her good dress and her repaired boots, and she shook Pete's hand at the door, in a way that made him stand up straighter. She looked at Wyatt last. "The Driscoll response is in the top right drawer," she said. "The Hargrove letter is under it. The Sutherland widow hasn't written back yet, but I think she will if she does. Put it with the others. I know where the files are," she said. "I know you do." She paused. "The mare's foot should be fully healed. She can go back on the work rotation tomorrow, Amelia." "What?" "I'll be here when you get back," he said. She looked at him, and this time she didn't put away what crossed her face. She let it stay there for one long moment, that open, unguarded thing, real and quiet and too carefully held for too long, and then she picked up her suitcase and walked to the horses. Wyatt stood in the yard and watched until she was out of sight. Then he turned and went back to the ranch and to the work of being a man who did not examine his own interior too closely, and who had just watched his wife ride down a mountain toward a city 2 days away, carrying the most important thing either of them owned. The waiting was the hardest part. It always was. He worked the way he'd always worked when something was grinding at him, hard and continuous. The kind of work that filled the hours so completely there was no space left for the other thing. He was up before the light and out long after it faded. Eli kept pace without comment, which was one of the things Wyatt valued about him. The younger man had a rare quality of knowing when the only useful thing was to work beside someone and stay quiet about it. On the third day, a rider came from town, not Whitmore's men. A boy from the post office, a teenager named Charlie Wick, who made extra money carrying urgent messages out to the ranches when weather or business made waiting impractical. The note was from Pete. 3 words: "She got there." Wyatt stood in the yard with the note in his hand and breathed out for what felt like the first time in 3 days. He looked at the mountains to the south. He thought about a woman in a city he'd visited exactly twice in his life, sitting across from a man named Edgar Frost, putting the ledger on the table between them. "Good news," said from the fence. "Yes," Wyatt said. He went back to work. The second note came 6 days after she'd left. Same boy. Same efficient knock on the gatepost. This time the message was longer, several lines in Pete's careful, school-taught handwriting. Frost took the case. He wants 4 days to review the documents. The Driscoll family is coming. Hargrove confirmed. Sutherland widow replied she'll come. Frost says if what she's shown him is accurate, he believes there is a case for criminal fraud, not just civil debt settlement. He used the word criminal. "She wanted me to tell you that specifically. Criminal fraud. Not a civil dispute over a debt." Criminal fraud meant Gangrem Whitmore wasn't just looking at being forced to forgive the debt claims. He was looking at the possibility of being held accountable for what he'd done. To Thomas Carter and the Hargroves and the Delacroix widow and every family he'd pushed off their land with papers that were never real. Wyatt read the note 3 times. Then he went to the barn, alone, and sat on a hay bale in the quiet, and let himself feel just for a moment something he had carefully not allowed himself for 6 years. Something that felt like hope. He was still sitting there when Eli appeared in the barn doorway. "Boss," and as Wyatt looked up, Eli's face had gone the particular flat. Careful way it went when something was wrong. 6 riders on the south road, Eli said. They're not stopping at the tree line this time. Wyatt stood up. He put the note in his pocket. He put the hope somewhere it would keep. Somewhere safe and out of the way. Then he walked out of the barn and into the yard to meet whatever was coming. 6 riders. Wyatt counted them from the yard without moving. 6 men on good horses, riding at a pace that was not hurried and not slow, the pace of men who had been told they had authority and believed it. They came up the mountain road 2 abreast, and the one at the front was not one of Whitmore's usual hired hands. Wyatt knew that because he knew the man. Sheriff Dale Pruitt had been the law in Chouteau County for 11 years. He was a large man, heavy through the shoulders, with a gray mustache and the particular bearing of someone who had held a position long enough to confuse the position with himself. Wyatt had dealt with him twice before, once over a water rights dispute with a neighbor 3 years back. Once when a drifter had made trouble at the south fence, and Wyatt had handed him over to the county rather than handle it himself. Both times Pruitt had been professional. Correct. The kind of lawman who did his job within the lines and didn't ask too many questions about who was drawing them. The kind of lawman, Wyatt now understood, who was useful to a man like Whitmore precisely because of that. Pruitt pulled up at the gate. "Callahan," he said. "Not unfriendly. Not the opposite either, Sheriff," Wyatt said. "I've got a writ of civil inquiry here." Pruitt reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "Concerning a debt claim against the estate of one Thomas Carter, deceased, and the whereabouts and legal status of his surviving heir. Amelia Carter," he paused, "or Callahan, as I understand she's now registered." "That's correct," Wyatt said. "She's my wife. And where is she at present?" "Traveling," Wyatt said. "Family business." Pruitt looked at him steadily. "The writ requires her presence for a civil inquiry within 14 days of service." "I'm serving it now, Callahan." "That puts you at, I can count," Wyatt said. Pruitt looked at the 5 men behind him, then back at Wyatt. "There's also a secondary matter," Pruitt said. He said it carefully. Like a man placing a glass on a table he's not sure is level. "Mr. Whitmore has filed a complaint alleging that certain ranch documents, financial records, and personal correspondence were removed from the Carter property without authorization at the time of Thomas Carter's death. He alleges those documents are currently in your possession." The yard went very quiet. Wyatt heard Eli shift his weight somewhere behind him and to the left. He didn't turn to look. "The records of a dead man's estate," Wyatt said, "would naturally be in the possession of his surviving heir." "Who is my wife? Whose property is my property under territorial law?" He looked at Pruitt evenly. "Was there a legal question in there, Sheriff? Or were you just sharing, mister?" "Whitmore's concerns?" Pruitt's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm asking whether you have documents that have been claimed as property of." "Every document in this house belongs to this house," Wyatt said. "If Mr. Whitmore has a specific claim with specific documentation, he's welcome to file it. I'll have my lawyer review it." He paused. "My lawyer in Helena. You might know of him, Edgar Frost." Something moved across Pruitt's face. It was small, a slight tightening around the eyes. The look of a man who has just been handed a piece of information that changes the geometry of his situation and is working fast to recalculate. He knew the name, that much was clear. "The writ still stands," Pruitt said. After a moment. 14 days, Wyatt said. "I heard you the first time." Pruitt looked at him for a moment longer. Then he folded the writ, leaned down from his saddle, and held it out. Pruitt straightened, looked once more around the yard with the careful look of a man memorizing what he saw, and then turned his horse. The 6 riders went back down the mountain. Wyatt stood in the yard until they were gone. Then he unfolded the writ and read it. Eli came up beside him. "That was Whitmore moving," Eli said. "Yes. The records complaint he's trying to get the ledger declared his property before Frost can use it." "Yes. Can he do that?" Wyatt folded the writ. "He's going to try." He looked at the road. "I need to get word to Amelia." He wrote the message himself, short and specific, and had it on the post rider before noon. Then he spent the rest of the day working the fence line with Eli and thinking through every angle he could see. The problem was this: the writ gave Whitmore 14 days of legal cover. If Amelia didn't present herself for the civil inquiry, she was in technical default, which a cooperative judge could interpret as admission of the debt. If she did present herself, she was walking into a legal proceeding in a county where Whitmore owned the sheriff and likely had influence over the judiciary. Either way, Whitmore was trying to force a move before Frost was ready. He was trying to collapse the timeline. Wyatt was still thinking about this at dusk when Pete rode into the yard, not from Lewistown, from the north, which made no sense for a second before Wyatt understood. Pete had come back from Helena, and he was alone. Wyatt was at the horse before Pete had fully dismounted. "Where is she?" "She's all right," Pete said immediately. "She's all right. She stayed in Helena. Frost asked her to stay. He wants her there, while he reviews the documents. He said having her present to answer questions saves him days of correspondence." Pete took a breath. He'd been riding hard. "She got your message about the writ. She sent me back with this." He produced a letter. Wyatt opened it right there in the yard, in the fading light, and read it. Her handwriting was the same as always, precise, controlled. The handwriting of someone who had learned to put their steadiness on the page. The letter was short. "Don't respond to the writ without Frost. He says 14 days is the deadline for appearance. Not for response, there's a difference. He is filing a motion to transfer venue to Helena on grounds of judicial conflict of interest in Chouteau County. If the motion succeeds, the inquiry happens in front of a Helena judge. Not a Whitmore judge. This is the move. Hold the ranch. Hold the documents. I'll be back before the 14 days. Wyatt read it twice. Then he looked up at the mountain darkening around him, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not relief, it was too early for relief, but something like the feeling of solid ground under his feet after a stretch of uncertain terrain. She was thinking clearly. She was thinking ahead. She was, in the particular way she always was, 3 steps in front of the immediate crisis. He folded the letter and put it in his breast pocket. "Good," he said. "She also said," Pete added, slightly hesitant, "to tell you the mare's doing well on the rotation, and she trusts you've kept the accounts current." Wyatt almost laughed. It surprised him enough that it came out as a short exhale that Eli, coming over from the fence, heard clearly enough to raise an eyebrow at. "She would say that," Wyatt said. He went inside and updated the accounts. The next 4 days were quiet in the way that a drawn bowstring is quiet. Everything was still, everything was held, and all of it was pointed at something. Whitmore's men stopped appearing on the South Road, which was worse in a way than when they'd been visible. It meant Whitmore had shifted to a strategy that didn't need men on the road. On the 5th day, Marcus Driscoll arrived. He came with his wife and a wooden crate that he lifted carefully from the back of his wagon, holding it the way men hold things that are worth more than their monetary value. He was a compact, weathered man in his early 50s, with the kind of face that had been reorganized by years of outdoor work into something that communicated absolutely nothing until he decided it should, and then communicated it very clearly. He shook Wyatt's hand at the gate. "I got your wife's letter," Driscoll said. "She wrote to me like she expected me to be a reasonable man." He looked at Wyatt. "I appreciated that. She doesn't waste words," Wyatt said. "No," Driscoll said. "She does not." He lifted the crate slightly. "I brought everything. 18 months of documentation. Every notice, every conversation I can remember written down. The names of every man Whitmore sent, the dates, what they said." His jaw tightened. "And the Helena complaint. All of it. Come inside," Wyatt said. Driscoll's wife, a quiet woman named Ruth, who had the steady eyes of someone who has survived a great deal and made her peace with surviving, looked at the ranch as she came through the gate. She looked at the barn and the house and the fence lines and the mountain above it all. Then she looked at Wyatt. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "we lost our ranch because of that man. Everything Marcus built in 12 years. Gone in 3 months. She paused. "We're here because your wife said this could end differently for other people than it ended for us." "I hope she's right," Wyatt said. They were inside for 2 hours. Driscoll laid his documentation out on the table next to the copies Amelia had left organized there, and Wyatt went through it with him piece by piece. The pattern was exactly what Amelia had described, the same debt structure, the same type of document, the same pressure campaign, the same accelerating timeline when the target resisted. The only differences were the names and the amounts. "He's done this before," Driscoll said, at one point, looking at Thomas Carter's ledger alongside his own. "These aren't the actions of a man making it up as he goes. This is a system. He's been running this system for years. That's what Frost needs to show," Wyatt said. "Not just that the individual debts are false, that the structure itself is criminal, designed from the start to defraud. Can he do it? My wife thinks he can." Driscoll looked at him. "Do you?" Wyatt thought about the letter in his breast pocket. About the handwriting steady as always. About the woman who had walked 4 days through the mountains with her father's ledger pressed to her chest now, and who was now Sells' office in Helena, building a case that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the territory. "Yes," he said. "I do. It was on the 7th day that everything shifted." Wyatt was in the barn at first light when he heard the horse come in, fast, not the measured pace of someone arriving. The flat-out run of someone bringing news they couldn't deliver slowly. He was at the barn door before the rider had fully stopped. It was Charlie Wick, the postboy. He was breathing hard, and his face was the face of a 17-year-old who had been given information too large for his age, and had ridden as fast as he could to get rid of it. "Message from Lewistown," Charlie said. He held out the paper. His hand was shaking slightly. "From the telegraph office. Came in last night, they sent me up first thing." Wyatt took it. He read it. His face did not change. It did not change because he had trained himself over years of things going wrong in ways he couldn't control, to keep his face still when his insides were doing something else entirely. But his hand, just for a moment, tightened on the paper. He looked up at Charlie. "No, sir," Charlie said. "I don't read other people's telegrams." "Good man," Wyatt said. "Go inside. Tell Eli to get you something to eat." He waited until Charlie was out of the yard. Then he read it again. The telegram was from Pete. "Something wrong. Frost's office broken into last night. Files disturbed. Your wife is safe. She was at the boarding house. But Callahan, the ledger is gone. The ledger. Thomas Carter's ledger. The one Amelia had carried 4 days through the mountains. The one she'd pressed to her chest on the night she arrived. The one that named every date, every conversation. Every man Whitmore had sent the record her father had kept, knowing he might not live to see it matter. Gone. Wyatt stood in the yard with the telegram in his hand and the mountain quiet around him, and worked through what this meant with the cold. Steady part of his brain that had learned to function clearly in bad moments because the alternative was worse. First thought, Amelia was safe. He held that and let it settle before he let himself think anything else. She was safe. That was not negotiable as a starting point. Second thought, Whitmore had reached into Helena. He had someone in Helena, someone who knew about Frost. Knew about the ledger. Knew the boarding house where Pete was staying and where Amelia was likely to be. This was not a spontaneous act. This was coordinated. This was the kind of move that required advance information. Third thought, where had the advance information come from? He was still on the third thought when Eli appeared at his elbow. Wyatt handed him the telegram without speaking. Eli read it. His face went through the same stages, the tightening, the calculation, the landing on the most important fact first. "She's safe," Eli said. "Yes, the ledger, I know. Frost can't build the case without—" "I know," Wyatt said. "I'm thinking." Eli went quiet. He was good at that. Wyatt thought. The ledger was gone, but the ledger was not the only documentation. Driscoll had his crate of records, sitting in the storage room off the kitchen. The Hargrove family was coming with their own files. The Sutherland widow had confirmed. What the ledger contained, the specific pattern. The specific dates. Thomas Carter's specific account of what Whitmore had done was devastating. But it was not the only thread. What it was the original. The first thread, the one that connected everything else. Without it, the other family's records were parallel cases. Not a linked pattern. With it, they were all connected to a single system. Whitmore knew that. That was why he'd taken it. Wyatt went inside and wrote 2 messages. One to Pete directly, 6 words. Did Amelia make copies? Answer fast. One to Frost's office, asking for an immediate accounting of what had been taken and what remained. He sent both with Charlie, who ate his breakfast with gratifying speed and rode back down the mountain with the particular energy of a boy who understood he was part of something important. Then Wyatt went to wait. Waiting was the part that cost the most. He had never been a patient man by nature. He'd built patience the way he'd built the ranch. Through necessity and the slow understanding that impatience was a luxury he couldn't afford. But it had always cost him, and it cost him now, the 7 hours between sending Charlie down the mountain and hearing hooves on the road again. This time it wasn't Charlie. It was Amelia. She rode into the yard at mid-afternoon, with Pete half a length behind her, and her suitcase tied to the saddle, and her face doing that thing it did when she'd been calm for so long through a bad situation, that the calm had become its own kind of expression, not peace, not composure, but the flat, clear-eyed look of someone who has already processed the emergency and is now on the other side of it. Wyatt was at the fence before she'd dismounted. She swung down from the saddle on her own and turned to face him. "The ledger," he said. "I know," she said. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She untied her suitcase from the saddle. "I made copies, Wyatt. 3 weeks ago, the second day I was in Helena. I asked Frost's clerk to help me, and we made 2 full copies of everything in the ledger, every page." Every held his gaze. "1 copy is with Frost. 1 copy is in this suitcase." The breath he let out was not entirely controlled. "You made copies," he said. "Papa spent a year of his life building those records," she said. "I wasn't going to carry the only version of them across a state line with Whitmore's men watching the road." She looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. "I'm not reckless, Wyatt. I'm careful. There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "there is." Something passed between them, then not quite a smile. Not quite anything that had a name, but something real and warm and mutual that both of them noticed and neither of them made a point of. "Come inside, Driscoll's here, and we have work to do." She came inside. The kitchen table that evening had more people around it than it had ever held since Wyatt built the cabin. Amelia sat across from Marcus Driscoll, with a copy of the ledger open between them and Driscoll's own records spread alongside it. Pete and Eli took the far end. Wyatt stood first, then sat, then stood again in the way he did when his mind was running faster than his body wanted to stay still. Ruth Driscoll watched all of it from the corner with her quiet, assessing eyes, and at one point she looked at Wyatt pacing behind the table and said, "Sit down, Mr. Callahan. You're making the lamp flicker." He sat down. Amelia didn't look up from the ledger, but something at the corner of her mouth shifted slightly. And Driscoll caught it and looked away. They worked through the night. By midnight they had a clear account of what Frost had and what he'd lost. What could be reconstructed from the copy and what couldn't. And what the 4 families' combined documentation could prove without the original ledger. By 2 in the morning, Amelia had written a 12-page summary of the documented pattern, clean, ordered, specific, the kind of document a court could follow without needing a lawyer to interpret it. By 3, Driscoll had identified 6 specific points of convergence between his records and Thomas Carter's that demonstrated the cases were not coincidence but method. "This is stronger than the ledger alone," Amelia said. At some point in the 3rd hour, she was looking at the pages spread across the table with the slightly unfocused expression of someone seeing a shape emerging from a distance. The original ledger was one man's account. This she gestured at the table. "This is 4 families, independent of each other, documenting the same system. That's not he said, she said. That's evidence. Frost will know what to do with it," Driscoll said. "He already does," she said. "That's why Whitmore tried to take it." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Wyatt said, "He's going to escalate." Everyone looked at him. "He's already tried the legal road, the writ, the civil inquiry." He's tried force the men on the South Road. He tried to destroy the evidence. None of it worked. Wyatt looked at the table, at the pages, at the assembled record of what Whitmore had done. He's a man who controls things by having options. We've been removing his options one by one. He paused. Men like that, when the options run out, they stop being strategic. They get dangerous, Pete said. They get personal, Wyatt said. He looked at Amelia when he said it. She looked back at him. I'm not going to hide, she said. Quiet. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you saying? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm saying we finish this before he has a chance to make it personal. We push Frost to move. We get the families to Helena. We don't give Whitmore a window. Driscoll nodded slowly. How long does Frost need? 3 days, Amelia said. He told me 3 days to prepare the filing. If all 4 families are in Helena and willing to testify, he can file the criminal complaint before the civil inquiry deadline expires. 3 days, Wyatt said. Then we need to move now. It was agreed. Driscoll and Ruth would ride to Havre the next morning to bring the Hargroves back. Amelia would telegraph the Sutherland widow, and Marcus would handle Bellamy. Pete would carry another copy of the summary documents to Frost directly. The plan was solid, logical, sequential. It lasted until morning. Wyatt was at the fence line at dawn, the frost still hard on the ground, when he heard shouting from the direction of the gate. Not the controlled urgency of a warning, the raw, cracked sound of genuine alarm. He ran. Eli was at the gate with his rifle up and his face white. In the road just below the gate, a man was sitting his horse at an angle that meant he was either drunk or injured. And as Wyatt reached the fence, he could see it was the latter. It was Robert Hargrove. He was alone, which was wrong. He should have been in Havre, a day's ride north. He was bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow that had soaked the side of his face a dark, dried red. His horse was lathered and shaking. Wyatt had the gate open before Eli had fully lowered the rifle. He got to Hargrove's horse and caught the bridle, looking up at the man. Hargrove was conscious barely, his eyes focused, and then unfocused, and then focused again, with the particular effort of someone fighting through shock. They came to the house, Hargrove said. His voice was thick. Last night, 4 men, they stopped, breathed. They said if I came south, they'd know about it. They said the records didn't matter, that no judge in the territory would move against Whitmore, and that men who tried to make trouble found themselves in situations they couldn't get out of. He looked at Wyatt. They hit me when I told them I was coming anyway. Wyatt held the bridle steady. Where's your family? He said. Safe, Hargrove said. I sent them to my wife's sister in Great Falls before I rode. I wasn't going to bring them into. He paused, wavering slightly. I've been riding since midnight, Eli, Wyatt said. Without turning. Get him then inside, Eli moved. Wyatt stood in the road for a moment after they'd helped Hargrove through the gate. He stood looking down the mountain toward the valley, toward the invisible presence of the man at the bottom of it, who had just sent 4 men to threaten an elderly couple in their home in the middle of the night. He felt something that was not fear and not anger exactly. It was clarity, the complete, cold, uncomplicated clarity of a man who has seen a thing for exactly what it is and knows precisely what needs to happen next. He turned and went inside. Amelia was already at Hargrove's side. Her medical competence as automatic and unsentimental as everything else she did. Cleaning the cut above his eye with quashersa and a clean cloth while the old men sat together with the dignity of someone who has decided they are not going to fall apart no matter what the morning has brought. She looked up at Wyatt when he came in. How bad? He said. He'll be all right, she said. Looks worse than it is. How many men did you say? Wyatt asked Hargrove. 4, Hargrove said, armed. The one who did the talking, a tall man. Red coat, spoke like he'd been educated somewhere and regretted it. His jaw tightened. He had my records, Callahan, not copies, my actual files. He held them up and told me he was returning them because they wouldn't be needed. The room went still. Wyatt looked at Amelia. She was looking at him with the same understanding. He had the same arrival at the same place. He took Hargrove's records, she said. He had them already, Wyatt said. Before tonight. Which means he's had someone in Havre, Amelia said. Watching Hargrove, waiting to see if he'd move, she set down the cloth. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were something else now, not fear. Not defeat, but the particular bright, hard focus of someone who has just understood the full scale of what they're facing. Wyatt. He knows who's coming. He knows who Frost is talking to. He's been ahead of us on the families. Not all of them, Wyatt said. She looked at him. He doesn't know about Driscoll, Wyatt said. Driscoll came here not through Helena, not through a telegraph. Not through any route Whitmore would have been watching. He drove his wagon up this mountain in person. He looked at Driscoll, who was standing in the doorway of the kitchen with Ruth behind him, and the particular expression of a man who is deciding something. He doesn't have my files, Driscoll said, and he doesn't know what I have, a pause. Does he know, Wyatt said. Driscoll looked at his wife. Ruth gave a small, precise nod. Then we're still in this, Driscoll said. He looked at Hargrove. And so are you, if you're willing. Hargrove looked up from the table. His face was bruised and his eye was swelling, and he had ridden through the night after being hit by a large man for the crime of wanting to tell the truth about what had been done to him. I sent my wife to Great Falls, he said. I rode through the night. You think a bloody eye changes anything? He looked at Wyatt. What do you need from me? Wyatt looked at this room full of people, Driscoll and Ruth. Hargrove sitting at his table with blood on his face. Amelia with the cloth still in her hand and her eyes lit with that hard, clear focus. Pete and Eli in the doorway, the organized pages of documents on the table. He thought about a frozen river and a rope and a man who did what was right without being asked. He thought about what it cost to be a man who still believed that mattered. I need all of you, he said, and I need you ready to move by tonight. Because Whitmore just showed us where the line is. He looked at each of them in turn. And we're going to finish this before he has the chance to push past it. Amelia looked at him. 14 days, she said. That's what the writ gave us. We're not using 14 days, Wyatt said. We're done waiting. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she set the cloth down, straightened up, and said, Then tell me what you need me to do. And the mountain, which had been holding its breath for weeks, finally let it out. They rode out before the sun was fully up. Wyatt had not slept. He didn't think anyone had, or if they had it was the shallow. Clothes-on kind that doesn't really count. By 4 in the morning the kitchen table had been cleared of everything personal and covered entirely with documents, the copy of Thomas Carter's ledger, Driscoll's files, Hargrove's testimony written in his own hand the night before, while Ruth sat beside him and Amelia guided him through it page by page, drawing out every detail he remembered with the patient precision of someone who understood that memory under pressure needed to be handled carefully, or it would collapse. By 5 they had a package of documents that told a story no single file could tell alone. By 6, Wyatt had made the decisions that needed making. Amelia would go to Helena with Driscoll and Hargrove. Not because it was safe, nothing about it was safe, but because she was the one who could walk Frost through the complete picture. The one who could hold the separate threads of 4 families' experiences together into the single coherent argument that a court needed to hear. She was the connective tissue of this entire case, and they both knew it, and neither of them wasted time pretending otherwise. Pete would ride with them as far as Lewistown and put them on the northbound train himself before riding back. Eli would stay on the ranch. Wyatt would go to Lewistown alone, 3 hours ahead of the others, and he would pay a visit to Sheriff Dale Pruitt. Amelia had looked at him when he said that last part. "What are you going to say to him?" she asked. "The truth," Wyatt said. "I'm going to tell him what we have, and what Frost is filing, and what's going to happen in the next 72 hours, regardless of what Pruitt does about it. And I'm going to give him the chance to decide which of this he wants to be on when it's over. You think he'll listen? I think he's a man who's been following Whitmore's lead long enough to have forgotten he had a choice, Wyatt said. I'm going to remind him. She studied him for a moment with those clear eyes that always seemed to be measuring something he couldn't quite identify. Be careful with him, she said. He's not a bad man. He's a compromised one. Those are harder. Wyatt looked at her. How do you know he's not bad? Because bad men don't get uncomfortable when they're serving writs on people they're hurting, she said. Pruitt was uncomfortable. I saw it in his face when he came up the mountain. She paused. That means there's still something in him that knows the difference. He thought about that on the ride down. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of cold that sharpened everything sounds carried farther. Distances looked shorter than they were, and his own thoughts had that crystalline quality that came with no sleep and high stakes, and the particular clarity of a man who had stopped hedging and committed to a direction. He found Pruitt at his office at 7:30. The sheriff was alone, which was what Wyatt had hoped for. He was at his desk with a cup of coffee and the look of a man who had also not slept well. Which was interesting. Wyatt came in without knocking and closed the door behind him. Pruitt looked up. His hand moved toward his desk drawer and then stopped. Because Wyatt's hands were visible and empty, and his posture said clearly that this was not that kind of visit. Callahan, Pruitt said. I'm going to tell you something, Wyatt said. And I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything. Pruitt leaned back. He looked at Wyatt for a moment with the assessing eyes of a man who had been reading people across desks for a long time. Then he said, "Sit down." Wyatt sat, and he told him. Not everything there wasn't time, and Pruitt didn't need every detail. He needed the shape of the thing, and the weight of it, and the clear understanding of where it was heading. Wyatt told him about the 4 families, about the pattern, about Frost and the criminal complaint that was being filed in Helena at that moment. He told him about the break-in at Frost's office. He told him about the 4 men who went to Hargrove's house in the night and hit an old man for saying he was going to tell the truth. He put the summary document on Pruitt's desk, the 12 pages Amelia had written in the 3rd hour of that morning. Clean and ordered and specific. He didn't tell him to read it. He just put it there. Pruitt looked at it. He didn't pick it up yet. He looked at Wyatt. You know what you're doing, Pruitt said. It wasn't a question. I know exactly what I'm doing, Wyatt said. Whitmore has a great deal of influence in this county. He had influence, Wyatt said. There's a difference between influence and the appearance of it. When the appearance goes, so does the other thing. Pruitt was quiet. The complaint Frost files, Wyatt continued, will name every fraudulent debt claim Whitmore has made in this territory over the past 6 years. That's at minimum 15 families, probably more. It will name the judge in Helena who has been pre-signing the debt documents. It will name the clerk who filed them. He paused. It will name every official who received those documents and processed them without question. The room was very still. Pruitt picked up the summary document. He read the first page. He read the second. He set it down and looked at his coffee and didn't say anything for a long moment. I didn't know about the families, he said finally. His voice was different, quieter. The professionals had gone out of it. I processed the Carter debt claim. I served the writ on your ranch. I did it because it was my job and the papers were in order. He stopped. I didn't look behind the papers. I know, Wyatt said. That's not an excuse. It isn't. Pruitt looked at him. The look of a man deciding something. What do you need from me? He said. Wyatt felt something release in his chest. Not relief, not yet, but the confirmation of what Amelia had seen in Pruitt's face on the mountain. The uncomfortable man. The one who still knew the difference. I need you to do your job, Wyatt said. When Frost files in Helena and the federal marshal moves because this is going federal. Pruitt, that's where criminal fraud at this scale goes. I need you to cooperate fully and to make sure Whitmore's men in this county don't interfere with what happens next. And if Whitmore comes to me before that, tell him to get a lawyer, Wyatt said. A good one. He's going to need it. Pruitt looked at the summary document one more time. Then he looked at Wyatt with the expression of a man who has just stepped off a path he'd been on for a long time and found that the ground on either side of it is solid after all. "All right," he said. Wyatt stood. "One more thing, what? 4 men went to Robert Hargrove's home last night. They hit him." Wyatt looked at Pruitt evenly. "I'd like to know who they were." Pruitt held his gaze for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and produced a piece of paper, the kind with a list of names on it, which meant he'd already known about it, or had found out this morning. And the fact that it was in his drawer, rather than on his desk, said something about what he'd been sitting with before Wyatt walked in. He slid it across the desk. Wyatt looked at the names. 4 of them. Local men, one he recognized as having worked Whitmore's South Range operation. 3 he didn't know. "I'll handle it," Pruitt said. His not uncertain anymore. "Good," Wyatt said. He left. He was back on his horse and heading for the edge of Lewistown when he heard his name called from across the street, a woman's voice. Sharp and urgent, in a way that made him pull up immediately. It was Ruth Driscoll. She was on foot outside the hardware store. Alone, which was wrong. She should have been at the train station 2 blocks east with Marcus and the others. Her face was the face of someone who is holding themselves very still because the alternative is worse. Wyatt crossed to her. "What happened?" "They're at the station," Ruth said. 2 of Whitmore's men, watching the platform. Marcus spotted them when we arrived. She looked at him. "They're not doing anything. Just watching," but Amelia said she stopped. "Amelia said to find you. Where is she now?" "With Marcus and Hargrove. Waiting at the freight office 2 streets over." Wyatt thought fast. 2 men watching the platform didn't mean they'd stop the train. It meant they were tracking who got on it, reporting back to Whitmore. Which meant Whitmore would know the families toward Helena before the train arrived. Which meant he'd have time to put something in the way. "Is the next train north the only one today?" he said. "No," Ruth said. "There's a freight connection that goes through at noon. It takes longer, 4 hours more, but it gets to Helena." Wyatt looked at his watch. It was 8:40. "Take me to them," he said. The freight office was 2 streets from the station, tucked between a feed supplier and a land registry office. Marcus was inside with Hargrove, their documents under their coats. Both men standing with the particular stillness of people who are experienced enough to know that visible anxiety is a liability. Amelia was at the window, watching the street. She turned when Wyatt came in. Her eyes went over him, quickly checking, assessing, and whatever she found settled her. 2 men, she said. "I said, change of plan. Freight train at noon. You 4 go together. 1 ticket. Marcus puts the documents in with the freight manifest. Nobody checks freight manifests at the station. You arrive in Helena at night instead of afternoon. But you arrive without being watched. And the 2 men at the station," Marcus said. "I'll deal with them," Wyatt said. "How?" Hargrove said. "I'll get on the northbound train," Wyatt said, "in plain sight. They'll report that to Whitmore. He'll be expecting someone to come off that train in Helena. By the time he figures out you didn't come with me, you'll already be at Frost's office." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Amelia said, "You'd go to Helena." "Yes. Alone, yes." She looked at him steadily. "That's not the plan we made." "The plan we made didn't account for 2 men at the station," he said. "Plans change." She looked at him for another moment. He could see her working through it, the angles, the risks, the alternatives. He knew she'd arrive at the same place he had. Because she always did, because her mind worked through problems the same way his did,
except faster and
with better handwriting. "All right," she said. But Wyatt, she stopped. He waited. "Don't do anything that puts you on the wrong side of the law," she said. "We're building a legal case. We need everyone in this room on the right side of it." He looked at her. "I'm going to buy a train ticket and sit in a passenger car," he said. "That's all." "All right," she said again. But her eyes said something else. something that she didn't put into words, but that landed in the room clearly anyway. He took it with him onto the train. The two men at the platform watched him board. He looked at them once directly, and then turned away and didn't look again. They were still on the platform when the train pulled out. He sat in the second car from the back and watched the mountains recede through the window and thought about what was moving on the mountain road toward the freight office, his wife. Driscoll, Hargrove, Ruth, and the documents that Thomas Carter had spent the last year of his life building. He thought about a man who kept records of an injustice because he couldn't stand to let it go unwritten. He thought about his son's name. He thought about Clara. He thought about the room inside him that had stayed closed for 6 years and the way it had started. In the past weeks, to feel less like a locked door and more like a wall that had been built, where a door used to be, and about what happened when you realized a wall and a door were not the same thing. He was still thinking when the train pulled into Helena. Edgar Frost was a small man, which surprised Wyatt. He'd expect someone large. The way formidable reputations usually seem to require large bodies. Frost was slight and compact, with sharp gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the hands of someone who spent most of their time writing. He stood when Wyatt came into his office like a man who had been expecting him. Which he had, Frost said. He extended his hand. Wyatt shook it. The grip was stronger than the size suggested. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Same," Wyatt said. "Where are we?" Frost sat back down and picked up a pen. "Your wife's copy of the ledger fills the gap from the break-in almost entirely. There are 3 pages I'm concerned, about entries from the 3rd week of April last year, but she's already reconstructed them from memory, which is admissible as corroborating testimony." He said it the way a man says things he finds genuinely impressive without making a production of it. "She has an extraordinary memory, I know," Wyatt said. "The Driscoll documentation," Frost continued, "when it arrives tonight, will give me what I need to demonstrate the systematic nature of the fraud. I've already drafted the criminal complaint. I'm waiting on one signature." He looked at Wyatt. "From the federal circuit judge who will be hearing the case." "Who is he?" Judge Samuel Birch, Frost said. "Federal appointment, not territorial federal, which means Whitmore's reach does not extend to him." Wyatt looked at Frost. "You're confident." "I'm careful," Frost said. "There's a difference." "I'm never confident until the verdict is in." He paused. "But this case, Mr. Callahan, in 20 years of law, I have not seen documentation this thorough assembled by private citizens under this kind of pressure. Your wife and her father between them have built something that most prosecutors would spend 6 months trying to construct." He looked at his desk. "Thomas Carter was a meticulous man," Wyatt said. He was. They were still talking through the specifics when the door opened and Amelia came in with Driscoll and Hargrove behind her. The crate of documents under Driscoll's arm, everyone slightly travel-worn but whole and present and here. Amelia looked at Wyatt across the office. He looked at her. "You made it," he said. She said. Then Frost stood up, pushed his glasses up his nose, and said, "Let's get to work." And that was the end of the conversation and the beginning of the last part of the fight. They worked through the night in Frost's office. All of them, Wyatt and Amelia and Driscoll and Hargrove, with Frost moving between them, asking questions and taking notes and building the formal legal structure around the evidence they had assembled. Ruth made coffee somewhere after midnight and brought it in without being asked. Pete arrived from Lewistown at 2 in the morning, having ridden straight through, and took up a position near the door with his arms crossed, watching as if he intended to personally prevent anything else from going wrong. At 3 in the morning, Frost set down his pen. "I'm ready to file," he said. The room went still. "Tomorrow morning," Frost continued, "I will present this complaint to Judge Birch. The complaint names Graham Whitmore on charges of systematic fraud, criminal conspiracy to defraud, and the corruption of judicial process through the fraudulent use of pre-signed legal documents." He looked around the table. It also names 6 other individuals, including a county judge. a territorial clerk, and 4 men who participated in the enforcement of fraudulent debt claims, including the assault on Mr. Hargrove. He paused. This is going to be loud. It is going to move fast once it starts. And there will be a period between the filing and the arrest where Whitmore knows what's coming before it arrives. How long is that period? Wyatt said. At most 24 hours, Frost said. Judge Birch moves quickly when he moves. But 24 hours is real. He looked at Wyatt directly. Your ranch, your wife's safety, these are concerns I want you to be clear-eyed about. I'm clear-eyed, Wyatt said. He looked at Amelia. We both are, she nodded once. Then we proceed, Frost said. They slept in shifts on the chairs and the narrow couch in Frost's waiting room. Wyatt didn't sleep at all. He sat by the window and watched the city and thought. And somewhere near dawn, Amelia came and sat beside him, not because either of them had said anything, but because she was awake too, and the window was where he was. And she had stopped needing reasons for the natural things. They sat without speaking for a while. Then she said, My father would have liked this. You said that before, he said. On our wedding day. I know, she looked at the window. I keep thinking it, 'cause I keep being in moments where it's true. She paused. He would have liked you. Not the version you think he'd like, the young version from the river. The one you keep talking about, like he's the only one worth knowing. The one you are now. This version, she said, is better. He looked at her. She was looking at the window. Her profile in the gray pre-dawn light, the ring on her hand. The particular stillness that was not distance but depth. He had learned to read the difference in the past weeks. He had learned a great many things in the past weeks that he hadn't expected to learn. Hadn't expected to want to learn. Amelia, he said. She turned and looked at him. He had not planned to say anything specific. He didn't know what he would have said if the door hadn't opened at that exact moment and Frost appeared in it with his coat already on and his briefcase in his hand and the expression of a man who had just made a decision that would define the next year of his professional life and was entirely at peace with it. Judge Birch sees me at 7, Frost said. I'd like you both present. They stood up. Whatever Wyatt hadn't said hung in the space between them for a moment. Amelia looked at him, the open, unguarded look that she was getting better at leaving on her face rather than putting away, and then she said, after in a voice that was only for him, and turned to follow Frost. He followed her. Judge Samuel Birch was 60 years old and had the bearing of a man who had seen a great deal of human dishonesty in his career and had retained, against the odds, a genuine outrage about it. He read the complaint in silence while Frost stood and Wyatt and Amelia sat, and the office clock ticked through 23 minutes of absolute stillness. Then he set it down. This is the most comprehensive documentation of systematic judicial fraud I have encountered in this territory, he said. Mr. Frost, you are prepared to present this in full? Completely prepared. Your Honor, Frost said, the families are willing to testify? All 4. Your Honor, the Driscoll and Hargrove families are in this city. The Sutherland widow and the Bellamys are traveling from Great Falls. Birch looked at Wyatt. Then at Amelia. Mrs. Callahan, he said, this complaint is built in large part on documentation assembled by your late father. You understand that you will be required to testify to the chain of custody of these records and to your own direct experience of the events described. I understand. Your Honor, Amelia said. Her voice was level and clear. I've been waiting for the opportunity. Birch looked at her for a moment. Something moved in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, the expression of a man who has been in courtrooms long enough to recognize a witness who will be believed. He picked up his pen. He signed the complaint. Issue the warrants, he said to the clerk behind him. This morning. The warrants were issued at 9:42. By 11, a federal marshal named Thomas Garrett Broad. Quiet, efficient in the way of men who do difficult jobs without drama, was on the southbound train with 3 deputies, carrying arrest warrants for Graham Whitmore and 5 named associates. They were also carrying a separate document, A court order freezing all of Whitmore's property transfers pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Frost sent a telegraph to Pruitt at 11:15. Wyatt sent one at 11:20, 2 words, "It's done." Amelia was standing beside him at the telegraph office when he sent it. She watched the operator take the message and tap it out. And she stood there for a moment after, looking at the counter, at her hands, at nothing in particular. Then she turned to Wyatt. "He's going to fight it," she said, "even with the warrants." "Men like him fight to the last." "Let him fight," Wyatt said. "That's what courts are for." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" The question surprised him slightly, not that she asked it, but the specific way she asked it, with the weight of everything they'd been through behind it. The weeks, and the mountain, and the nights at the table, and the morning at the window that hadn't finished yet. "Yes," he said, and then more honest, "better than I've been in a long time." She held his gaze for a moment. "Wyatt," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You don't know what I was going to say." "No," he said. "But I know what I should have said this morning." He paused. "I'm not good at saying things. You've probably noticed." "I've noticed," she said. The corner of her mouth moved. "I'll work on it," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking you to be different than you are." "I know," he said. "I'm asking myself." The telegraph office hummed around them. The operator at the far end of the counter deliberately focused on his equipment. Pete standing in the doorway, having turned himself very carefully to face the street. "After we get home," Wyatt said, "when this is settled, I'd like to start over." She tilted her head slightly. "Start over." "Not from the beginning," he said. "I don't mean," he stopped. "Try it again. I mean start the part that comes after everything we've been doing. The part that isn't about Whitmore, or the case, or mountain, or survival." He looked at her. "The part that's just us." Amelia was quiet for a moment. The thing in her face, the open, unguarded thing she'd stopped putting away, stayed exactly where it was. "I'd like that," she said. "Quiet, simple, entirely true." Outside the telegraph office, in the city of Helena on a November morning, the southbound train was carrying a federal marshal toward a valley where Graham Whitmore did not yet know his world was ending. In the freight office down the street, Robert Hargrove was sitting with his wife, his safe, unharmed wife who had arrived from Great Falls an hour ago, and holding her hand with the grip of a man who understands what almost losing something costs. Marcus Driscoll was at Frost's office, writing his formal statement in the careful, patient way he did everything. Ruth was with him, probably making more coffee. On the mountain, Eli Murdoch was feeding the horses and watching the South Road and waiting for news. And in a small telegraph office on a city street, 2 people who had started this as a desperate arrangement and a dead man's last request stood close enough together that their arms were almost touching. Both of them were thinking about home. The truth, Wyatt had learned, had a way of surviving. It took longer than it should. It cost more than it ought to. It required people who were willing to write things down and keep the papers and carry them through the mountains and sit in lawyers' offices in the middle of the night refusing to let it be buried. But it survived. Thomas Carter had understood that. He'd written it all down in his careful hand, on plain pages, in the last months of his life, not knowing if it would ever matter. Unable to stop himself from making sure that if it did matter, it would be there. His daughter had carried it, and somewhere in that chain the river, the rope, the porch, the ring, the mountain, the ledger. The night after night at the table, it had become something that neither of them had planned for. And both of them were only now learning to call by its name. The train back to Lewistown left Helena at 4 in the afternoon. Wyatt and Amelia sat side by side in the passenger car, not touching, not speaking for the first 20 minutes, watching city fall away behind them and the mountains come back into view. It was the first time in 3 days that neither of them had anything urgent to do, and the absence of urgency had a texture to it strange and slightly disorienting. like a man who has been carrying something heavy for so long that when he sets it down his body doesn't trust the lightness. Pete sat across the aisle, asleep within 10 minutes of departure. His hat over his face, his posture the boneless collapse of a man who had earned unconsciousness. Driscoll and Hargrove were in the car behind them, riding back to collect their families and begin the formal process of what Frost had already started calling the reconstruction, the legal unwinding of every fraudulent transaction Whitmore had executed over 6 years. Which was going to take months, possibly longer, but which Judge Birch had already indicated he intended to supervise personally. Amelia had a small notebook open on her knee. She wasn't writing in it. She was just holding it, the way she sometimes held things when she was thinking, using her hands to stay still while her mind moved. Wyatt looked at her hands, at the ring. "He'll try to delay the trial," she said. Without looking up. "Frost will handle it," Wyatt said. "I know," she paused. "I'm not worried about the trial. I'm thinking about what happens after." She turned the notebook over in her hands. "The families. Getting their land back, or compensation for what they lost, that's a separate process from the criminal case. It could take years. It will take years," Wyatt said. "That's how it works. It's not right, but it's how it works." She looked up. "Does that bother you?" "Yes," he said. "Doesn't change it." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said, "it doesn't." She turned back to the window. "I want to help with it. The restoration process. Frost said there's a civil component that the families will need support navigating, and that someone with detailed knowledge of the original debt documentation would be valuable." She paused. "I want to do that, I know," Wyatt said. She looked at him. "You knew before I said it. You've been building toward it since Helena," he said. "Since Birch signed the complaint. You're not the kind of person who stops when the first part is done." She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite surprise, and not quite something else, more like the look of someone who has just been seen clearly, and is still deciding how to feel about it. "No," she said quietly. "I'm good," he said. She held his gaze. "Yes. What you said. At the telegraph office." She looked at her hands. "About starting over, the part that's just us." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about it." "So have I," he said. "I want to say something about it," she said, "and I need you to let me say the whole thing before you respond." "All right." She took a breath. Not a dramatic breath, the breath of someone organizing what matters into the right order before they say it out loud. "I came to your ranch because I had no other choice," she said. "That's the truth, and I've never pretended otherwise. I came because my father trusted you, and because I was out of options, and because 4 days through those mountains was better than what Whitmore was offering." She paused. "I want you to know that I know that. I know where this started. Amelia, I'm not finished," she said. He closed his mouth. "What I didn't know," she continued, "was what I was walking into. I thought I was looking for shelter. A name to stand behind. A man with enough standing to make Whitmore hesitate." She looked at the window. "I didn't know I was walking into something that was going to." She stopped. Started again. "You make me feel like myself," she said. "Not a version of myself that's manageable or convenient or appropriately sized for the room. The actual full version." She looked at him directly. "That's rarer than you know. The train moved through mountain country. The rhythm of it steady and constant under their feet." "Clara used to say something like that to me," Wyatt said. His voice was different when he said her name, now still careful. Still held, but differently held than before. Not locked away. Just kept with the reverence that good things deserved. She said I made her feel like she had enough space to be all of herself. He paused. "I've been thinking that maybe that's the thing. The actual thing. Underneath all the other things. Whether a person makes you feel like there's enough space." Amelia looked at him. "Do I?" she said. He looked back at her. "Amelia, I have not wanted to come inside in 6 years. Not really, not for anything other than sleep and weather. I've lived on the outside edge of my own house because the inside was too much like something that used to exist and doesn't anymore." He paused. Since you came, I come inside. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, That's the most you've ever said at one time. I'm working on it, he said. Like I told you. Something shifted in her face, the open thing. Fully open now, not being put away, not being managed. She looked at him with the complete, unguarded expression of a woman who has carried herself with extraordinary strength for a very long time and has just found a place where she doesn't have to. All right, she said. Soft, entirely certain. Let's go home. He reached across the space between them and put his hand over hers on the notebook. She turned her hand over and held his. Pete, across the aisle, was definitely not asleep, but he kept his hat over his face and didn't say a word, which was the single most tactful thing he had ever done in his life, and which Wyatt would eventually acknowledge. Not today. They arrived in Lewistown at 8 that night and found a message waiting at the station from Eli. It was 3 lines. 6 riders came at midday. Did not come through the gate. Sat on the road for 2 hours. Then a rider came from town and they left fast. Haven't come back. Ranch is quiet. Come home. Wyatt read it and handed it to Amelia, and she read it and they looked at each other. The warrants, she said. Whitmore found out, Wyatt said. That's why they left. Where is he now? Frost said Garrett was moving by noon, Wyatt said. If the riders cleared out by midday, he probably knew the marshal was coming before Garrett got to the valley. Did he run? It was the question neither of them had addressed directly, yet the possibility that Whitmore, with his resources and his network and his advance warning, had simply disappeared before the marshal could reach him. It was a real possibility. It was the kind of thing that happened with powerful men who had spent years building exit routes alongside everything else. They got horses from the livery. It was too late and too dark to ride the mountain safely at full speed. So they rode at a steady pace with Pete behind them and the cold night air around them. And Wyatt thought about Whitmore the whole way up. He was still thinking about it when Eli met them at the gate. Eli had clearly been watching for them. He was at the gate before they reached it. Lamp in hand, his face doing the particular thing it did when he had news he wasn't sure how to deliver. Tell me, Wyatt said. Telegraph came an hour ago, Eli said. From Frost. He held out the paper. Garrett got to the valley at 4. Whitmore was at his ranch. He didn't run. Wyatt looked at him. He didn't run. Eli paused. Frost said Whitmore told Garrett he had no intention of running because he had done nothing wrong and that any charges brought against him were the result of a coordinated campaign of slander by people with personal grudges. Eli's mouth tightened slightly. He was arrested at his own dining table. Garrett said he was calm about it. He's going to fight it in court, Amelia said. He's going to fight it in court, Eli confirmed. Good, Wyatt said. He handed the telegram back. That's where we want him. He dismounted and handed his reins to Eli. That's where we win. He said it without heat, without triumph, with the flat certainty of a man who had looked at the evidence and done the math and knew what the result was going to be, regardless of how long it took to get there. Amelia dismounted beside him. She looked at the ranch, the cabin, the barn, the fence lines that disappeared into the dark, the mountain above it all, and she stood still for a moment, in a way that was different from her usual stillness. What is it? Nothing, she said. Then, more honest, I'm just looking at it. It's dark, he said. You can't see much. I can see enough, she said. He looked at her, looking at the ranch, and he understood what she was doing. She was recognizing it. The way you recognize something as yours, not legally, not technically, but in the way that matters more than either of those things. The way that lives in the body rather than the paperwork. Come inside, he said. She came inside. What followed was not dramatic. It was, in fact, deeply ordinary, which was exactly what made it extraordinary for 2 people who had spent the better part of 2 months operating at crisis level. They ate. Eli had kept something warm on the stove. He was that kind of thoughtful. Quietly and without making a point of it, and the 4 of them sat at the table. Wyatt and Amelia and Pete and Eli and ate and talked in the loose, slightly scattered way of people who have been through something together and are now on the other side of it and don't quite know what to do with the stillness. Pete told a story about something that happened in Lewistown while he was waiting for Amelia's train that involved a runaway mule and the county magistrate. And it was genuinely funny, and Wyatt laughed a real laugh. The kind that comes up without permission, and Eli said he'd never heard that laugh before in 2 years of working here. And Pete said he hadn't either, and Amelia looked at Wyatt with an expression that was warm and private and entirely hers. He looked back. After supper, Pete and Eli went to the bunkhouse. The cabin was quiet. Amelia stood at the kitchen table and looked at the surface of it, cleared now. No documents, no ledgers, no carefully organized evidence of systematic fraud. Just a table. Just a home. Strange, she said. What is? It's just a table, she said. It's been a table this whole time. I forgot. We've been using it for other things, he said. Yes. She touched the surface of it lightly with her fingertips. Wyatt. Yes. I want to plant something in the spring, she said. A garden. I know that. Paused. I know that's not a war council or a legal strategy or anything useful. I just want to plant something. He looked at her. There's a plot on the south side of the cabin, he said. I cleared it 3 years ago and never did anything with it. Good soil. Gets morning light. She looked at him. You cleared it, she said. I had plans, he said. Then I didn't for a while. She looked at the cleared plot. Invisible in the dark outside, but present in both their minds. We'll plant it in spring, he said. She smiled. Not the careful, managed almost smile he'd seen in the first weeks, the real one. The one that changed her whole face, the one that had been appearing more often and more fully as the weeks went on until tonight, when it arrived completely and without reservation. Yes, she said. We will. They stood in the kitchen of the cabin on the mountain. The fire burning steady in the stove, the night pressing quiet and cold against the walls. And everything that had built up between them over 2 months of crisis and proximity and shared work and the slow, resistant, inevitable opening of 2 people who had both learned that closed was safer and were being proven wrong. All of that was present in the room. Not spoken, but not needing to be. Wyatt moved first. Not toward her, toward the window, because he needed a moment and he thought better near windows. Which she knew by now and waited for. He stood at the window for a moment. Then he turned around. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to know that I'm not saying it because of the train or the telegraph office or anything that happened in Helena. I'm saying it because it's been true for a while, and I've been careful about it. The way I'm careful about everything. She looked at him. Waiting. I love you, he said. The words came out quiet and direct and without decoration. The way he said the things that mattered most, stripped of everything extra, because the extra would only get in the way. The room was absolutely still. Amelia looked at him. She looked at him for long enough that he started to wonder, not doubt exactly, but the particular vulnerability of a man who has said the true thing and is now in the gap between saying it and knowing what it costs. Then she crossed the kitchen, and she put both hands on either side of his face. And she looked at him the way she looked at problems she had already solved completely. Directly, with the full force of everything she had. I know, she said. I've known for weeks. I was waiting for you to catch up. He looked at her. Weeks. You're not as unreadable as you think you are, she said. I've been told otherwise. By people who weren't paying attention, she said. I pay attention. He put his hands over hers. I love you too, she said. In case that wasn't clear. It wasn't, he said. But I was hoping, she laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her. He felt it more than heard it, the way laughter moves through someone's hands when they're holding your face. He had not felt anything like that in a very long time, and it moved through him like the first real warmth after a long winter. Reaching places that had been cold so long, they'd forgotten they were supposed to be anything else. He kissed her. She kissed him back, which he had also. He now realized been hoping for, without letting himself know it. Outside, the mountain was dark and old and vast, the same mountain it had always been. The same peaks, the same ridgelines, the same cold that came down from the high places at night, and pressed against the walls of whatever humans had built and dared to call shelter. It had been here before Wyatt, and it would be here after him, and it did not concern itself with the small, bright, particular fact of two people standing in a kitchen, finally telling the truth. But inside the cabin the fire burned. 3 months later, Graham Whitmore stood trial in Helena. He had, as predicted, fought every step of it, the best lawyers his money could retain. Every procedural motion available, every delay that could be manufactured. He had been calm and well-dressed and had maintained, through all of it, the bearing of a man who believed that the rules of the world were on his side, because they always had been. Edgar Frost dismantled him piece by piece, the families testified. The Driscolls, the Hargroves, the Sutherland wit a small, composed woman named Eleanor, who had been 72 years old when Whitmore's men came to her home, who testified with a clarity and specificity that made the courtroom extremely quiet. The Bellamys, 11 other families whose cases had been connected to the pattern through the investigation Judge Birch had expanded after the initial filing. Amelia testified for 4 hours on the third day. She sat in the witness chair and answered every question Frost asked with the same clear, steady precision she brought to everything. She described her father's records, the chain of custody of the documents, the specific events of the debt campaign against Thomas Carter's estate. She described the night Whitmore had come to her house after her father's death. What he had said, how he had said it, the exact words she remembered because she had written them down the same night. Whitmore's lawyer cross-examined her for 2 hours. He did not break her, he did not come close. At one point, midway through the cross-examination, the lawyer suggested that Amelia's testimony was motivated by personal animosity that she had. In his words, constructed a narrative to punish a man against whom she held a grudge. Amelia looked at him steadily. "My father spent the last year of his life fighting a debt he didn't owe," she said. "He died before he could see it resolved. I am here because he couldn't be." She paused. "That's not animosity. That's a daughter finishing what her father started." The courtroom was quiet. The lawyer moved on. Wyatt sat in the gallery and watched her. He had been watching her for 3 hours, and what he felt as he watched was not separate things: pride, love, admiration, the particular ache of knowing you are looking at someone extraordinary, but all of those things together. Seamlessly, the way things blend when they have had long enough to settle into each other. She looked at him once during the redirect, when Frost was re-establishing the pattern evidence and the room's attention was elsewhere. Just a look, brief, direct, the private language they had developed over months of proximity and shared stakes. It said, "I'm all right." It said, "I see you there." It said everything that didn't need words, because they had run out of reasons to need them. He nodded once. She turned back to Frost. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Whitmore sat at his table and did not move when the verdict was read. He had been calm all the way through, and he was calm now, in the specific way of a man whose internal world had already collapsed and who had nothing left to spend on visible reaction. Judge Birch sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison and ordered the full restitution of fraudulent debt claims to every affected family, with interest. The territorial clerk who had processed the documents received 2 years and permanent disbarment. The Helena judge who had pre-signed the debt forms a man named Rourke, who had testified for the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence and who had wept during his own testimony in a way that the courtroom had found alternately. Sympathetic and insufficient received 3 years. Pruett, who had cooperated fully with the federal investigation and had personally arrested 3 of the men who had gone to Hargrove's home, was not charged. He resigned his position as sheriff 6 weeks after the trial and moved north to be near his daughter's family, which several people said was probably good for everyone involved. The Hargroves got their land back. Not the original property Whitmore had sold it twice over, but a settlement that let them buy comparable land north of the Judith. Better situated than what they'd lost. Robert Hargrove sent a letter to the Callahan Ranch 2 months after the trial. It was 3 pages long, and the last paragraph said, "Your wife saved us. I want you to know I understand that. I want you to tell her I understand that." Wyatt read the letter aloud to Amelia that evening. When he got to the last paragraph, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He should know it wasn't just me." "He knows," Wyatt said. He said, "Your wife. That's both of us." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." The Driscoll family did not return to their original valley. Marcus had said, early on, that he didn't want the original land back, that too much had happened there. That he and Ruth wanted a new start, rather than a recovered old one. They settled near Great Falls, and Marcus sent Wyatt a letter every few months for years afterward. Practical letters about land and cattle and the price of grain, with a line at the end that was always some version of, "Ruth says hello and asks after the garden." The garden. It was Marcus's letter in April, 2 months after they'd come home from Helena, that reminded Amelia she'd told Wyatt she wanted to plant something. She mentioned it at breakfast, and Wyatt looked at her and said he hadn't forgotten. And after breakfast he went to the south side of the cabin, and she came with him. And they stood looking at the cleared plot in the morning light. "What do you want to plant?" he said. "Everything," she said. "But practically? Beans, some herbs." She paused. "My mother grew lavender. I don't know if it does well at this elevation. We'll try it," he said. "It might not take. Then we'll try something else," he said. "We've got time." She looked at him at the word time, the word that had not applied to either of them for months, that had been scarce and pressured and running out for so long that its ordinary abundance now felt like a gift they hadn't earned. They planted the garden that week. It was not a romantic project. It was muddy and physical, and Wyatt turned the soil while Amelia directed where things went with the authority of someone who had clearly thought about this more than the conversation at breakfast suggested. And they argued mildly about the spacing of the bean rows. And she was right about the spacing, and he admitted it. And Pete came by in the afternoon and watched for a few minutes and said it was looking good, and Amelia threw a handful of dirt at him. And he laughed and went back to work. The lavender took. This was in the accounting of small miracles that accumulate into a life. The one that mattered most to Amelia, more than the verdict. More than the restitution orders, more than any of the large things. She found it one morning in late June. The first small gray-green shoots pushing through the mountain soil with the unreasonable confidence of things that are supposed to exist and have decided to exist regardless of what the elevation thinks about it. She stood looking at it for a long time. Then she went inside and found Wyatt at the table with the accounts and said, "The lavender took." He set down his pen. He looked at her face, at the expression on it, which was the full, unguarded, completely real version of the woman who had arrived on his porch on a November night with blood on her lip and her father's last words in her hand, and had somehow, in the space of months, become the person his life organized itself around. He stood up. "Show me," he said. She took him outside and showed him. They stood in the garden in the June morning and looked at the small shoots of lavender. And Wyatt thought about his wife's mother planting lavender somewhere she didn't know would become her only daughter's memory of her. And about Thomas Carter writing records he didn't know would survive him. And about a rope tied to a cottonwood tree on a frozen riverbank by a man who just felt like he should, before anything happened that would explain why. He thought about all the things that happen before they're supposed to, all the small characterizations that make no sense until the moment they make complete sense. And then make all the sense in the world. He put his arm around Amelia's shoulders. She leaned into him, not the careful, managed closeness of two people learning the distance around a fire, the full, easy, natural lean of a woman who has found the place she belongs and stopped needing to be careful about it. They stood like that for a while. He would have loved this, she said. Your father. I think he planned it, Wyatt said. She looked up at him. The lavender? All of it, he said. I think Thomas Carter was a man who thought several moves ahead and knew exactly what he was doing when he told you to come up this mountain. She was quiet for a moment. He always said he wasn't a gambling man, she said. But he liked odds. He liked to look at a situation and figure out where the likely outcomes were. She paused. He said the only bad bet was the one you didn't think through. Then he thought this through, Wyatt said. Yes, she said, I think he did. She was quiet again. Then do you think he knew? About us. About what it would become. Wyatt thought about it honestly. I think he knew it could, he said. I think that was enough for him. She nodded slowly. Leaned her head against his shoulder. Thank you, she said. For what? For not giving me the horse, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I thought about it. I know you did, she said. You thought about it and then you stepped back from the door and held the lamp up so I could see my way in. She paused. That's the whole story, really. Right there. He thought about that. She was right. That was the whole story. Everything that came after the accounts. The ledger, the mountain, the trial, the verdict. The lavender was the consequence of a single moment on a November night when a man who had decided the world was safer at a distance made a small, involuntary, entirely human choice to hold the light up for someone who needed it. He had not known what he was doing. He had done it anyway. That, Wyatt Callahan understood now, was how the best things happen. Not through grand plans or heroic decisions or the clean, certain knowledge of what came next. Through small choices made in uncertain moments by people who were tired and grieving and not sure of much but who still, when it mattered, held the light up. He had been closed for 6 years. And then a woman had come to his door with nothing but a dead man's trust and her own extraordinary self. And she had not asked him to open. She had just walked in. And the man who had spent 6 years learning to live without warmth had looked at her, sitting at his kitchen table in the lamplight. And something deep and stubborn and long-sealed in him had said, not yet, not done. There is still something here worth staying for. He had been right. 1 year after Amelia Carter walked across his threshold on her knees in the November dark, Wyatt Callahan sat on his porch in the early morning with a cup of coffee and the sound of his wife moving in the kitchen behind him and the smell of lavender coming from the south garden. And he understood something he had not been capable of understanding before she came. That surviving was not the same as living. That grief was real and permanent and did not go away, but that permanent did not mean the only thing. That Clara and James were with him still, in the room he kept for them. Always, and that the room being kept did not mean the rest of the house had to be empty. That a man could lose everything, and still, if the right person arrived at the right moment, and he was barely wise enough not to send her away, find himself with something worth every single thing it had cost. The door opened behind him. Amelia came out with her own coffee and sat in the chair beside his, the one that had been empty for 6 years and was empty no more and would not be again. She looked at the mountain. He looked at her. Good morning, she said. Good morning, he said. The mountain held them both, its old, vast, indifferent patience, the way mountains hold everything. Without judgment, without preference, simply present for whatever the humans at their feet choose to make of the time they have. And what these two chose, on a morning in early summer with lavender in the garden, and the whole long day ahead of them, was this: they stayed. They stayed and they worked. And they built something that outlasted the crisis that had built it, something that had started as desperation and obligation, and a dead man's last wish, and had become, through the alchemy of shared hardship and honest words, and the slow, stubborn, magnificent refusal of two wounded people to stay broken, something real. Something that held. Because that was the truth Thomas Carter had understood when he sent his daughter up the mountain to a man who needed a reason to come back inside. Love does not ask permission. It does not arrive announced. In the right circumstances at the right time. It arrives the way Amelia arrived on your porch in the dark. On its knees, asking only to be heard. And the only thing that determines what it becomes is whether you hold the light up. Wyatt Callahan held the light up, and the life that followed was everything.